You are listening to the Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. Join him as he and his guests discover how businesses thrive in California.
Welcome to the Pilgrim on the 405. We're going to have a ball today because we have a woman who has given her life to sharing with other folks, and she's going to tell you a lot about it. But this is Beth Guckenberger, who is the executive director of Back-to-Back Ministries, and I want Beth to tell you what that means. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So tell us what Back-to-Back Ministries does.
Sure. We're an orphan care organization. We serve orphaned and vulnerable children in several different countries around the world, and we provide holistic care for them. So that means we're not just a feeding center or an educational program. We provide for all the basic needs of lots and lots of kids around the world.
Wow, that's wonderful. So now we met at the Barnabas Group where you were speaking. So you're a speaker, you're an author. I've read a couple of your books. So tell us how did you get into taking care of orphans?
I definitely didn't imagine myself growing up doing anything like that. And I went to college to be a teacher. But my husband and I, in the summertime after we graduated from college, used to take high school kids from our local church youth ministry on mission trips. And we would go down to Mexico, and we were partnering with a church in the south of the country. And one mission trip in particular, we were doing what we were asked. We were painting a wall around a church from blue to green. But the problem was the year before, I was pretty sure they'd asked us to change it from green to blue. And the kids that we brought to feel inspired by God's work around the world, they weren't feeling inspired. In fact, I was so discouraged at how they were not swept up in what God was doing in that city. So I was complaining to my husband, do we have to paint on our last day? He looked over at me kind of exasperated, and then he just said, do you think there are any orphanages in this city? And I had no idea, but we had been to an orphanage once in college on a trip just for a day, and it had left an impression on us. So we left our students in the hands of very responsible adults, and then we jumped into a taxi cab. And we just drove around and kept saying the words orphan in a Spanish accent. I didn't speak any Spanish at the time, so we just were like, orphano, orphanorio, orphanatorio. And finally, the guy figured out what we wanted, and he left us at an orphanage. And then he drove away, and I looked over at my husband, Todd, and I said, we even remember the name of the street that church is on? And do we have enough pesos to pay someone to take us back? And if these people answer the door, what are we going to say? And we had more questions than answers, which I think most of the best stories in life begin with more questions than answers. And we had this peace that came over us. I've since understood it as the peace that passes all understanding, the Bible writes, but I just knew that all of a sudden I wasn't afraid. And I knocked on the door and pushed Todd in front of me because he'd had a little bit of high school Spanish. And this guy answered the door, and we said to him in some funny little language, we have $200 US, 20 able-bodied high school students, and a complete day left on our trip. And if you could have access to those resources, what would you do? And he told us that the front windows were all broken and the kids hadn't had meat in a year, and we could do something about that.
Oh.
And so we did. The next day, we brought some students back, and Todd fixed the window, and I was grilling hamburgers, and he pointed out to me a little girl. I told him I couldn't keep my eyes off her. She was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. And he said, well, I think you've taken your eyes off of her a few times. She's been in your line, 5 times. I don't know any preschoolers who can eat that much. And so the next time she came in line, I grabbed her hand and we started walking somewhere. I didn't know where we were going, but we ended up in the doorframe of her dorm room. And there she let go of my hand and she scampered off with her buddies, and they were putting hamburgers underneath their mattresses, helping each other lift them up. And that's how the whole story started. We really stood in that doorframe and thought to ourselves, we know there are people out there that would buy hamburgers for orphans if they only know how to get it to them. And the journey of the last couple decades really started in that doorframe.
Wow. Wow. So talk to me about your experience in Monterey with orphanages there.
Yeah, when we arrived, we ended up taking the next year to get prepared for a journey. We had, just so little understanding of what was ahead. We would go on to live in Monterey for the next 15 years. But when we arrived, I would have believed me I was going to make it through 15 days, let alone 15 years. I mean, everything was hard. Every single thing we had to learn the hard way. I didn't even understand. We weren't parents yet. I thought as a teacher I knew about child development, but the development of a hurt child is completely different than the development of a child with a healthy attachment. So we just had so much, and still are actually learning, even all these years later, about what and how the needs of kids like that are to be met. But, we had some funny little first friendships and funny stories as God helped us acquire the language and build a base. And then really the ministry was born in Monterey, Mexico, but today it's in India and Africa and Haiti and just other countries now around the world.
Well, tell me about what's the need? How many? I think you talked about how many orphans there are in the world.
Yeah, the World Health Organization basically recognizes 163 million orphaned children, and you can define orphan in several different ways. The kind that we see like on the Disney movies or whatever, those are what are typically considered double orphaned, which means both mother and father have no ongoing care for that child. They're also single orphans, what they call social orphans. But altogether, there are 163 million kids out there who are not being seen and not being known. And that is the heart of the first steps, is we've got to see and know who these kids are and what it is that we can do for them.
163 million. Now, what about the U.S.? How many in the U.S.?
Well, that's a complicated question. There is a growing need within our foster care system for families who will take in children, sibling sets, undocumented immigrant children who need therapeutic homes. The needs are continuing to grow. And in some pockets of the U.S., you see the churches responding to that need. There are counties with churches that have strong teaching in this subject, where you can see that there are more families of faith willing to take in vulnerable children than there are children. But that's the minority. In most counties in the U.S., we have far more children on a waiting list than we have families available to take them. And so I love it when I hear of a church that takes the initiative and makes the effort, and even when the leadership sets the standard, to be thinking about what our counties need and how we might be able to step into that gap.
Well, I have been with a number of kids who've grown up in the foster program, and that's not always a good experience.
No, it's not. People are motivated to participate as foster parents for all kinds of reasons. And depending on the kind of home that you find yourself in will depend on the kind of experience. That's why there's some people out there that are rethinking really the mechanics of the foster care system. Currently, the biggest incentive for people to participate in it is financial.
Right.
But that's not the right reason to bring a child into your home, especially one that will demand so much of you. It's best when families feel a sense of calling, because then they go and look to the Lord for the things that they need on any given day, like any of the rest of us. I've been a foster parent for many, many years, and we need things like wisdom and mercy and kindness and patience and self-control and gentleness and love and peace. And those are kinds of things the government can't put in an envelope and send to our house. Those are the kinds of things we only can get from Jesus.
Well, is it possible for a church to get excited about, not creating an orphanage, but creating a community that would welcome children into their homes and support each other in that?
Yes, there's a couple rock star churches that have set just a really beautiful example of training and teaching and providing respite and actual homes and full-time care and all the different ways and places you can get plugged in. There's a fantastic church in South Texas. There's one in Atlanta. There's another one out in Denver. some good internet searches would help any of your listeners find those churches, and they are cleaning out the county's foster care roster and putting them inside of faith communities. And it's been a very beautiful thing to watch this movement.
Wow. So is that something you could help a church do?
I certainly could help them understand where and how they could get started with something like that. You just want to make sure that you've trained your people enough to be able to understand what it is they're getting into. A child that comes from a hurt place has a whole different set of needs than a child that you may have raised biologically in a stable environment. So sometimes people think, well, I was a great mom and I raised 4 boys and I can do a teenage boy from a hurt place. And you just would want to make sure your congregation or your extended family or whomever it is that you're challenging and encouraging to consider it understands exactly what they're getting into. So our organization has a training program called Trauma Competent Care, where we help families understand how to put the tools in their tool belts that they need to love and grow up kids from hurt places.
Now, my sense is, this may be too simplified, but it seems to me that we have enough adults, parents, families, that we could take care of every one of those orphan kids out there if we wanted to. Is that right?
Absolutely. We could do that. Yeah, certainly if even every church in America decided to make a stand and take in one child, we could change the trajectory of this story in our country. And it's hard. The problems just compound. I just heard recently about 70% of children in the United States who are trafficked into in a human trafficking circumstance into other countries. 70% of them come from the foster care system. So I was saying to somebody, okay, well, we know now where they come from. Now we need to back up and not just rescue children from the dangers of a human trafficking scenario, but we need to help prevent them from even being vulnerable to it.
Wow. So it's really an upstream question.
Yes. If a church can get involved with a child at an early age, or even late in the game, my husband and I have provided foster care and adopted teenagers. Even at that late in the game, the rules are different, the needs and demands are different, but it's possible. You can absolutely change the life of a child.
In your experience, if someone says, well, that would be nice, but I don't have the resources to do that. I don't have the money, the time. Tell us about where Jesus has intervened in those episodes.
Yeah, I think my theology would be that if God's asked you to do something, he will provide for you whatever it is he's asked of you. So if you step into a story, it may be that you don't know the answer to all the questions you have about what if they get sick, what if they want to go to college, what if, like there's going to be lots of what ifs. But if you feel God prompting you to take those steps, then there's an element of faith that we can exercise that says whatever it is that I need at any point in the story, he will be there to provide for me. So I think that's less a question of God's commitment to provision and more of a question of our understanding and faith in it and of it, because he will always provide.
Well, my wife had an experience like that. She 7 years ago, she was ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church, and being an older priest, the bishop said, well, we're probably not going to have a job for you when you finish seminary. And so after she was ordained, she went to visit him. He said, okay, I've got this place for you. Now, she's a full-time instructor at California Baptist University, full-time professor at California Baptist University. And so he said, I want you to go out to this church that I have closed because they just really got to where they didn't have enough people to keep the church going. It's a beautiful place, but I want you to go out there and take it over. And she said, okay. He said, now, there's no budget for it. There's no salary, and you can't start a congregation. she said, no budget, no salary, no congregation. What do you want me to do? He said, I want you to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and teach the children. And she said, well, how do you expect me to do that? And he said, well, I want you to get in your car. I want you to drive out to Riverside, and you and the Holy Spirit will figure it out on the way. Now, this woman did exactly what you're talking about. She went out and said, look, folks, I don't know how to deal with homeless folks. You're going to tell me, because that's who showed up. Been doing that for 7 years, and she's not missed a beat.
And probably has the best stories from it. I mean, when we're at the end of our own abilities, that's when the best stories get told.
Yes. So tell me the story of the little kid who he and his family were hungry.
Yes. So, a number of years ago, I was living in Mexico, and I came to the United States to speak at a church. And when I was done speaking, this man said to me, are you talking about Monterey, Mexico? I go there on business. I'd love to exchange cards with you. And the next time I'm in town, I'll take you and your family out to dinner. And then we can see all the orphanages, and you can show me what your ministry looks like. And I said, that's a great idea. And I remembered meeting him. I remembered his name was Carlos. I remembered a couple of the details, but I had forgotten who he worked for, and I had lost his card. But he hadn't lost my card. And about 4 months later, he gave me a call. He was in the city. It was a Saturday. And he said, I'll be done around dinner with my business. Is that a good time? Can you pick me up downtown and we go grab a meal and you show me around to the orphanages? And so I made arrangements to do that with him. Meanwhile, I get off the phone and tell my husband about what we were going to do that night. And he said, I don't know who you're talking about. I don't have any of the details. I'm not sure. I'm going to let you we're not just going to go out with some complete stranger and take our kids there without more information. So he and I were having that ongoing discussion. Meanwhile, one of the children's homes where we serve, the director of that children's home, Edgar, had woken up that day, and he knew he only had enough money in his petty cash box to pay for brunch on that Saturday for the 50 kids that he was ministering to in his orphanage. And so he woke up, and he should have called me at that point. I was specifically a missionary living in that community for that purpose. I would have immediately run him over an emergency kit of beans and rice and eggs and oil and tortilla. It would have filled him up and taken care of those kids. But he was getting nervous. Those children were beginning to put us in a place that only Jesus belongs, that he was the giver of all good gifts, not we were the giver of all good gifts. So instead of him calling me, he just went out and bought the ingredients for that brunch, that almuerzo, and he served it to the kids. And then he waited 6 hours and called them back down into the kitchen. And they would tell me later that when they came back down into the kitchen, they were like, there's no food in here. It doesn't smell very good. And he said to them, I know you're hungry, and I know I don't have anything to give you, but I also know that you're some of God's most favorite children. And there's no way he's going to leave us here without feeding us. So we're just going to pray him right now and ask and thank him for the provision we believe he'll bring. And the kids all thought that was weird, that they were hungry. So they did. They just closed their eyes and they started to pray. And there was a little boy who was 4. He was at the table. His name was Joel. And he interrupted that prayer. And he was like, Tio, which is how you call uncle in Spanish. And Edgar was willing for the interruption. And so he stopped the prayer and he said, yes, well. And Joel said, are we praying that God brings us dinner? And Edgar said, yeah, we are. And he said, well, what kind of dinner do you think God's going to bring? And Edgar said, I don't know what kind of dinner God's going to bring. And Joel was like, well, I do. I bet if he's God, I bet he brings us meat. And Edgar's like, okay, we can pray for some meat. And because this is, of course, a children's home who'd have, lots of beans and rice. And they began to pray, close their eyes again and ask God for some meat for dinner that night. And Joel was just thinking, and he finally interrupted Edgar again. And he was like, Tio, what kind of meat do you think God brings you? And Edgar's like, I don't know what kind of meat God's going to bring you, but I know the Bible teaches us that he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And Joel was like, well, I think if he's God, I bet he brings you steak. And Edgar was like, okay, well, we can pray for that. So Edgar began to pray for steak, and the kids followed along. And that was all going on in that children's home that day, and we didn't know anything about it. Meanwhile, my husband had decided to run down to where this man was doing his business to get some more information before we brought our family out to meet with him. And he gave me a call and he said, Beth, forget dinner. I'm just going to take him around to the children's home directly. He's been down here in the convention center all day and he has leftover product and he can't take it back over the border and he doesn't need it anymore. And it doesn't fit in our freezer. So we just call the children's homes and let them all know that I'm on my way over with a donation. And I was like, okay. I mean, that's all the information I needed. I hung up the phone with Todd and I picked up the phone, and the very first place I called was Edgar's children's home. It was only 8 blocks from the convention center. And I said, hey, Edgar, this is Beth. I'm just calling to see if you guys are around tonight. He said, yeah, we're around. What's going on? And I said, well, Todd's on his way over with a guest and a donation. I just wanted to make sure someone was there to receive him. And he said, no, yeah, we're here. Do you know what he's bringing? And I said, I don't. I just know he wanted me to make sure you had some room in your freezer. And Edgar got quiet and he's like, yeah, I got some room in my freezer. And I said, okay, great. He'll be right there. And I was getting ready to hang up with him, but he interrupted me and he said, Beth, do you know what he's going to be putting in the freezer? And I thought to myself at the time, like, if it goes in the freezer, it goes in someone's stomach. Like, does it even matter? It's food. But I didn't say that. I just said, I don't know what he's bringing in the freezer. I know that he's been at that meat convention that's going on downtown. And he said, okay. And he got real quiet and he goes, do you know what kind of meat it is? And I said, I don't know what kind of meat it is. I'm sorry. And he's like, would you mind terribly finding out? And I can remember just thinking, like, why are we so picky? But I hung up the phone and I called Todd and I'm like, honey, I don't know what's going on with Edgar, but he'd like to know exactly what kind of meat you're taking over there. And he said, Beth, it's like these incredible cuts of steak. He said, this guy works for the John Morrell Meat Company and they're trying to attract some new restaurant business in the city. So it's like filet mignon and New York strip and T-bone and sirloin. And he's like, I don't even know if you're going to know what to do with it over there, but we're on our way over with it. So I hung up the phone and I called Edgar back. I'm like, Edgar, it's like this incredible cuts of like filet mignon and New York strip and T-bone and sirloin. And I said, I'm coming to your house for dinner tomorrow night. How's that? And he finally told me what had been happening for almost an hour at that point in his children's home. And then he held the phone away from his mouth and he yelled out to the kids, hey kids, God's on his way over with your steak. And I like that story for a couple reasons. Honestly, Will, I think to myself, I don't like to get my back up against the wall. I don't like to be in a place where I can't take care of myself. And Edgar purposely put himself there. And when I get in over my head like that, most of the time, I cry out to man. And man brings you things like beans and rice and eggs and oil and tortilla.
Yeah.
And God brings you, he loves reasons to show up and show off. And I think the last reason I like that story is because I just think God has big plans for that young man that he decided to teach him at age 4.
Yeah.
It takes faith the size of a mustard seed.
Yeah.
To move a mountain.
Wow. What a story, Beth. What a story. You can't make those things up.
You can't make them up. That is for sure. That is for sure.
All right. Well, we're going to take a little break here. So stick around because I want to hear more about your stories, and I also want to hear about more things that people can be actually doing.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Pilgrim on the 405. We have been just having a ball with Beth Guckenberger, the executive director of Back to Back Ministries, telling us about how God has really so many times brought what was necessary to help kids. So Beth, we're here in Southern California, LA, Santa Barbara, Orange County, Riverside County. What could people do if they wanted to?
I think that's a great question. I think it's not that different from the story I told you in the last segment. That day I showed up at that orphanage, I said, this is what I have in my hand. I have $200 US and I have able-bodied teenagers and I have a complete day. And I think it's that same assessment that we can take of what do we have in our hand? Do we have more time than we than we need? Do we have discretionary time we can give away? Do we have more dollars than we need? Do we have discretionary dollars we can give away? Do we have more ability or network or relationships or talents or gifts, or like what is it that we have been given in our hand? And then how can we bridge what we have with those that might need it? And I know there in Southern California, you have all kinds of fantastic organizations that are doing great things for orphans and vulnerable children. And I would encourage people to take a look at those. If you can't find something that fits your heart or passion and curiosity and need and calling and all of that, I mean, certainly I would encourage you to take a look at Back to Back. We have a website that shows all kinds of places for people to take steps forward. And I think momentum takes over from there. I would love for people to think, I have $100 extra a month. Let's do a sponsorship as a family and put a child's picture on our refrigerator and make them a part of our extended family. Or I have an extra week of vacation every year that I never quite know what to do with. And you want to come on a mission trip and you want to go to one of the countries in the world where we serve and see up close and personal what that front line looks like. Maybe you have a particular gift. I think this is a funny story. I was talking to a group of families about how they might be able to use whatever it is that God has given them on behalf of the orphan and vulnerable child. And there was a 10-year-old in the front row, and he was looking to get out of this talk. And he raised his hand to interrupt me, and he said, "I'm not really that good at anything. I don't really have anything that God can use. Can I be excused?" And I said, "Well, I'm sure you're good at something. Like, I mean, I'm sure you've got skills in some area." And he's like, "I'm not really that good at anything yet." And I said, "You're not good at anything?" And he looked at me right in the eye and he said, "Well, I'm pretty good at Xbox." I said, "Well, ask Jesus what he can do with your Xbox." And he stayed quiet the rest of my time in front of them. But then a couple months later, about 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. And it was written by this young boy. He had gone back to his elementary school in Indiana. And he had hosted an Xbox tournament, and he had 41 participants, and he had charged them each $10 to participate. Then he got some local businesses to donate some prizes, and he had his mom write a check for $410. And he said, "Look what God did with my Xbox." And I think to myself, if God can do something with a boy in the middle of Indiana and an Xbox, I can't even imagine what he can do with the people that are listening there in Southern California. And
Yeah.
part of it is just having that question posed to us, like, what could God do with what it is I know I'm already good at?
Uh-huh. So, thinking particularly about kids, what are valuable things that people can do with and for kids?
I mean, probably the most important thing that they can do is listen to them. Today, children are not heard in the same ways that even a generation ago that we were heard, in terms of all the noises and things that compete for healthy relationships. And it's important for us to start listening to the kids in our own homes. It's important for us to listen to the kids that are in our communities. And it's important for us to see and know children who might have nothing in common with our life experience. We now know today, because of studies, that it takes the presence of 8 adults in the life of a child from a hard place to change their trajectory. So not all 8 of those adults will be primary caregivers. They may be mentors and teachers and coaches and pen pals and all kinds of things. But to think about what you have the capacity and margin to provide, and then who it is that might need to receive it, it's a really important part of the story, is to listen to kids.
One of the things that we think about in the the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles, is lots of congregations want to bring in more young people, more youth. And it occurs to me that there's lots of youth out there who need to have a community.
Yes.
And if you think about it, well, we're going to start a youth program. That's one thing. It seems kind of a traditional way of thinking about it. Now we got to go be really attractive to get these youth into our program. Well, they're all playing soccer and they're doing this, doing that. But if we said we are going to create a place for children who don't have something else, that could be really powerful. I
mean, that's exactly where that need is. I mean, the difference maker in the life of a child is to be loved and know that they are. And whatever we can do as adults in the lives of children to help them know that they're seen and known, it is a difference maker. And so while I'm not opposed to programming, I think really creating connection and space for community is the most powerful thing a church can possibly do.
Well, we say in the business world, we say one of the most important things, the most important thing for human beings is everybody wants to be heard and understood. Mm-hmm. And in a business, if somebody believes that you have heard them and understood them, it changes the whole dynamic.
It does.
And I'm just thinking about what that means for a child,
mm-hmm.
to be heard and understood.
And it gives them an appetite for connection, for substantive conversation, for healthy relationships. It gives them a sounding board. It gives them a place to ask good questions. So, yeah, Collie, if churches could figure out ways to engage in that frontline battle, that's really the most powerful thing we can do. I was in Israel this summer. I have traveled many times to Israel to study, and I was thinking about this idea, tikkun olam, which in Hebrew means basically to heal or repair the world. It's this idea that we're going to encounter crooked roads on earth. Like sin entered the world, things are broken, people are broken, families are broken, governments are broken. Like, it's not very hard to convince people of the brokenness in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's not our job to judge that brokenness. It's not even our job to stay away from that brokenness. It's actually our job to enter into that brokenness and make as many of those roads straight as possible, not because of our own strength, but because of what God can do through us. And so it's sometimes messy to bring crooked roads into our churches. It's sometimes messy progress isn't always easy to measure, and we don't really always know or agree on what success looks like, but there's some really, really neat things going on around the world with orphans and vulnerable children. And I just encourage your listeners to either engage in it or be initiators of it.
Well, it seems to me that part of what we do is I don't know how true it is in other parts of the world, but especially in Southern California, there's a lot of places where we build gates and walls to protect ourselves. And that gets obviously expanded out into build a big wall. Mm-hmm. And what I hear you talking about is we're not in the world to protect ourselves from the danger. Our job is to enter the danger. Yeah,
we're supposed to build bridges, frankly, not walls.
Yeah.
And that's not a political statement. That's
no. That's all. I think it comes out of it, but it really, whether that wall gets built or not is irrelevant. It's not going to stop people from coming in, and it's not going to stop us from going out if we choose to. Mm-hmm. And so to me, churches can become places of protection and walls. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's part of what we're being challenged to do. The church is getting smaller and less relevant because we're trying to protect ourselves from those very dangers that we're really called to go and become part of.
Definitely. I was in Turkey, or what the Bible calls in first century Asia Minor, and I was in a town called Sardis, where there was an early church planted, and those guys were worshiping fertility gods, and they had tremendous festivals and practices that were just sexually despicable, frankly, and hard to look at. And so when those earliest missionaries went into that community and had to tell them about Jesus, they were exposed to things that they had probably never seen before, just depravity at its most extreme. And you'll see the ruins of those early Artemis temples, and right next to them are the ruins of those earliest churches. Those churches didn't plant way, way far away from all that craziness.
Right there.
They went right there in the middle of it because human experience is the same. I mean, we feel things like lost and afraid and hurt, no matter what time frame we're born into or what culture we're born into. Life outside of Jesus is hard. And if churches can go right in the middle of where it's hard and offer that good news, that kind relationship, that gentle hand, I mean, we would be full to the brim in our churches. It is definitely about going out of the walls.
My grandson is on the LA County Fire Department.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as he became part of the fire, and this was a big goal for his, he worked on it for 4, 5, 6 years to become it. And so when he got on it, I thought, oh my goodness, that is a dangerous job. And as I began to talk to him about it, he said, it's not dangerous. It might look dangerous, but we practice all the time. And when there is a fire, we don't run away from it, we run to it. Mm-hmm. And he said, we know what we're doing there. I mean, we have confidence.
Yes.
And that's something that seems to me that's the message that I would have for churches, is we have confidence. Now, can you imagine a fire department that said, these telephone calls about fires, they're really bothering us. Let's cut the line. Mm-hmm. Right? We'll practice over here, but we're not going to let them bother us anymore. Plus, that's hot and dangerous, and we could get hurt out there. Mm-hmm. So we'll just build a little nice, quiet place here where we can practice our fire, our practice putting out fires within our walls. I'm wondering how long that fire department would stick around.
Would not be relevant.
Yeah. And it would get smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And so what I heard from him is, this is what we do because we love it. We're called to do this, and we know how to do it. And I just wonder if that's part of what, I had a bishop once who said to me that we as Christians we put on equipment and we train to be able to be under the water at 100 fathoms, right? And he said, we're all geared up for that. And we're joyfully going off to unstopped bathtubs.
And, yes. And I think the muscles get stronger. So like my encouragement to someone who's, the first time you maybe enter into the story of someone who's broken, and it's hard and messy and you don't like it and it costs you something and you feel inconvenienced and you're uncomfortable and all the things that inevitably happen and you want to quit, recognize that your muscles are getting stronger every interaction. Every time you sacrifice, every time you cry out for help, those muscles inside of you, they get exercised. And I think eventually as believers, it's our job to become fluent in hard stories. Mm-hmm. That instead of sitting back and judging people, that we understand how they got there, what they need to get out, and what our role might be in it.
And it really does move from scarcity to abundance, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. You can't outgive God. I mean, I've been doing this now over 20 years. My husband and I have 10 children. We work, frankly, more than full time. There should be, left to myself, I should be exhausted, broken, exhausted. But you can't outgive God. The more that you offer yourself, the more he fills you up from the most unexpected of places.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's my experience. That is certainly my experience is as we find places to give out of our abundance, there's more that fills it up. And what's that verse? It overfills it, to press down. It's just huge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We forget that.
Yeah, Malachi will talk about, test me in this and see if I don't throw open those storehouses and fill you to overflowing. And I think there is a natural inclination to like, oh, I'm already at capacity. I'm already
70. I'm 80. What was that? Sarah said, I could never have children.
Yeah. We all have excuses. The young think they're too young and the old think they're too old. And the busy are complaining about what they're doing that frankly, most of the time is self-imposed. I mean, the truth is we'll always have excuses, but there are good stories out there waiting for us if we'll step into them.
Well, we're going to use this. We're going to use this, our conversation, as a challenge to folks, as one of many challenges to come on in. The water's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Just try it. Just try it.
And I think there's a contagion to it. I mean, I think that's the high. We host a lot of people on mission trips, and they get that helper's high, that, that which science usually describes as that rush of endorphins and dopamine that get in our brain when we give ourselves away. But I think it's more than just neurobiology. I think that the Spirit comes and fills us up. And the more we try it, the more we give our life away, the more hungry we are to continue to do so.
Now, let me ask you, in all the things that you have given, have you ever missed a meal?
No.
Have you ever been homeless?
I have not, no.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Yes. And the truth is, when I look back, I don't feel like what we've done with our life has been sacrifice. Even if in reality you can say, but you've given this up or that up, it doesn't feel like sacrifice.
If we talk to Jesus today, I don't think he would talk about the sacrifice of Good Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would take our eyes and move it from Friday to Sunday, and to say, it's not the sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's the abundance of the resurrection.
Yes.
Because as long as you focus on the sacrifice, you'll never have enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, I could not agree more. And I just thank you for the time that we've had to be able to talk like this. I think that a lot of times this kind of conversation makes us uncomfortable. Me too. Like, Lord, you're asking for more and I'm supposed to do more. And what if I can't fix things? But my mantra lately has been, I shouldn't try to fix what God wants to heal. I'm not the healer. There's nothing I can do about other people's problems or even 163 million orphans. Like, I can't fix that, but I can put myself in a posture where God can use me to be part of healing. And
well, when you think of creation, 13.7 billion years of continuing creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And think about that first star. The first star that finally gets to the place where it burns itself out, expands, and then collapses.
Mm.
One would say, oh, what a poor star, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's out of that star that comes oxygen, iron, molybdenum, all the elements that were never there before that lead to us. Now, did that star sacrifice? Or was that the ongoing resurrection and creation?
I certainly believe in that creator, for sure.
Yes,
for sure.
Absolutely. And we're not even halfway there yet.
Well, it's a good journey. It is a good journey.
Well, we're going to use this. We're going to share this with folks, and this and others like you who are out there living out the prom. It's not really a hope or a promise, because hope is never the strategy. It's really experiencing that abundance that's there, and then shouting over your shoulder, "Hey, come on in. The water's fine."
It's more than fine. It's awful refreshing.
All right. So again, tell us if this has resonated with anyone out there.
Yes, I would love.
What can they do?
For sure, you can jump on our website. That's back2back.org, back2back.org. There you can find all kinds of information on how you can go on a trip or get training or sponsor a child. I would love for you to consider in some way taking a step towards Back to Back, and together we'll take a step towards the orphan and vulnerable child. So it would be my total joy.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Beth, for being with us and being such an inspiration out there.
Thank you. Thanks, Will.
Keep discovering what's next.
Amen.
All right. Thank you very much.
Blessings.
Take care. Blessings to you.
You've been listening to the Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ.